Hi everyone and welcome to today's video. So this is part 3 of my recent trip to the Faroe Islands. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, I recommend you go back and check them out. But for those who can't, let me catch you up. In the last episode, we made our 44-hour crossing from Stornoway in Scotland to Valga in the Faroe Islands. And we spent the day exploring Valga and all it had to offer. After a much needed rest, we threw off the lines in Valga and we headed out of the fjord. It was an overcast start to the day, but this gave us the beautiful view of the rolling clouds coming off the hills as we exited the fjord, and it also meant that there was a little bit of wind, so unlike our crossing, we were able to get the sails out and actually do a bit of sailing for a while. The trip today would take us north of our original island, up the east coast of the island of Sandoy, and we were heading into the main island towards Tórshavn. We were fortunate to have a pretty calm day today, and although the wind wasn't that exciting for sailing, we were treated to some absolutely stunning views of the little islands and rock formations that make up this part of the Faroe Islands. As the day went on, we lost more and more of the wind, so we decided to stop and have a closer look at some of the islands, including this cave area, where we also tried some fishing, but with no particular luck. It was late in the afternoon as we approached the capital city of Tórshavn. The harbour where we would be staying was right in the centre, which allowed us to navigate through the breakwater and all of the commercial shipping to get right into the centre of the harbour. Tórshavn is in a notoriously busy harbour, and we were a little bit concerned as to whether we would get Skyline's 48-foot moored up anywhere, but fortunately we found a really convenient little slot right on the end of the pier. Once tied up, we were met by the local immigration service who signed us in, so we were now officially and legally in the Faroe Islands. We spent the rest of the day walking around and exploring Tórshavn, and I must say it's one of the most beautiful capital cities I've ever been to. Despite its small size and sprawling nature, it is filled with quirky and beautiful houses of all different shapes and sizes. Having the harbour right in the town centre as well meant that we were right in the thick of the action and could walk straight off the boat and into the main areas, which was filled with beautiful cafes, restaurants and bars. This helpful plaque on the top of one of the main lookout areas showed all of the various sites that you could see around Tórshavn. This made for a great reference point, even though it was guarded by a few woolly bullies. I definitely recommend Tórshavn as a great place to visit if you're interested in interesting architecture and just a beautiful little city getaway. It's full of these little streets with grass-roofed houses, and even the former Parliament area is grass-roofed and made of these quirky little buildings. The next day, having spent a week cooped up on Skyline, we decided to leave the water behind and jump on a bus to go and explore some of the other islands. So we took the bus to Sørvágsvatn. Apologies for the pronunciation there, it's probably pretty terrible. This allowed us to not only see more of the islands from the inland, but we got to go through some of the Faroe Islands' amazing tunnels which go between the two islands. We also got our closest encounter yet with some whales, which shame it was from the bus and not from the boat. The main reason for this trip was to visit the famous Hanging Lake, which is one of the biggest lakes in the Faroe Islands, and it exists about 30 meters above sea level. It was a bit of a slog up the hill, but it was definitely worth it to see some of the breathtaking cliffs around this area, although it was a little bit scary to get too close because the wind was howling over these cliffs and at every moment you felt like you might be blown off. Here on the most northwestern tip of the Faroes, there is even more rugged coastline, and the backdrop of the beautiful lake is stunning to say the least. After visiting the lake, we headed down to the local town where we enjoyed the views with this horse. It was very intently staring at something, and then we hopped back on the bus towards Tórshavn. The next day we decided to head further north to Klaksvik, a town on one of the northeastern islands. Unfortunately, my phone died shortly after this and I lost a lot of the footage from this trip, so all I really have left is the dramatic entrance between these mountains into the town itself. We spent the night in Klaksvik and the next morning it was blowing 30 to 40 knots, so we waited out the storm and we headed off later in the day when the wind had died down, but the waves and swell was certainly still a major thing. We were heading back south to Tórshavn as we knew we had a weather window coming up for the crossing back to Scotland, so we were starting to prepare for this. As the day went on, the sea settled a little bit, but the wind completely died and was replaced with heavy rain, and it was this rain that led to the demise of my phone, which carried a lot of the footage from the previous few days. Rain still hammering down on us, we did make it back to Tórshavn, and very conveniently the spot we had left just a day ago was still open for us. We had another lovely evening in Tórshavn before the next morning heading over to the very small fuel berth to top up the tanks, as we weren't sure if our next destination would have the facilities to do this. We left Tórshavn in the mist and we headed south before cutting west along the northern side of the island of Sandoy. The tide through here was brutal, and despite very little wind we were still getting around 10 knots all the way. The sea was calm until we passed this literal tide line where you can see the two tidal currents meeting in the sea, and we turned down the west side of Sandoy Island. I must say this was one of the most beautiful stretches of coastline in a pretty dramatic set of coastlines that we'd seen, with the clouds rolling over the tops of the hills like smoke. It was truly like something out of a Hollywood movie. The weather was fine and we did manage to get a bit of wind, which allowed us to sail down this coastline, but it was a little bit patchy and we ended up a mix of motor sailing and sailing. By the time we rounded the southwest tip of the Sandoy Island, we had beautiful blue skies above us, but the sea had turned pretty choppy. We ended up heading into the village of Sander, where there was a small commercial fishing port, and we were able to squeeze ourselves in between a couple of the boats there. So we tied up the boat and settled in for what would be our last night on the Faroe Islands. In the next episode, I'm finally brave enough to throw on my snorkeling gear and go in the water to see what the sights under the water look like in the Faroes. We also cast off the lines for the last time in the Faroes and head south back towards Scotland. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe and check back next time for the last episode in this series.